Hi, guys. Welcome back to the Untitled Podcast. If you're new here or returning, thank you for tuning in to listen to me yap today. And today, if you've seen the thumbnail, we are going to be talking about one of the biggest, hottest, newest movies that has came out recently that is still keeping its weight in terms of having it stored in people's memories and in people's minds. And that movie today is called Obsession. Now, I've watched Obsession not once, not twice, but three different times. And within each and every single time I have watched it, I have still left with more questions. And even more so, I was still shocked, disgusted, uncomfortable, and, truthfully spooked. Mostly because of, I'm not sure if this is how you say her name, but the girl who plays Nikki, I'm not even going to try and say her name. The girl who plays, I think her name's Indy. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'll put it on the screen. But I have seen this movie multiple times and it has done its works each and every time. And so with today, I'm going to be going over 8 bullet points that pretty much talks about all of my thoughts, all of my questions, and also some discussions in which I've seen online, theories, XYZ. And with that being said, let's dive in to the world of Obsession. We're going to be talking about Bear's Name. When I first watched the movie, I didn't realize how strange it was that the director of this film and maker of this film honestly chose a very specific name, it seems, for the main character, which is Bear. Because if you think about all the other characters within our storyline, right? You have Bear, you have Sarah, Ian, and then Nikki. Sarah, Ian, and Nikki all have pretty standard names. Those names aren't special. They aren't really unique. You could probably look on any sort of school registry in the United States and find those names. But when it comes to Bear, that's a very specific and sort of odd name to have. And it made me honestly think a little deeper. Granted, I'm going to put a disclaimer right here that this is a stretch. When I thought about Bear's name, I thought about the discussion of bear versus man that was happening on TikTok that I haven't really seen anybody sort of make this connection. Granted, Baker is a fairly young guy. I believe he's in his 20s, probably nearing his 30s if I had to guess. And on top of that, he's definitely on the digital, sphere. He's a YouTuber, for Christ's sake. Like, he's been on the internet. And I was thinking, considering the social aspects and messages that are within this film that are very prominent throughout this film and that creates the horror of this film, I wondered if Bear's name was intentionally given because of that discussion of bear versus man. Now, if you somehow live under a rock, no tea, no shade, but if you do live under a rock, the whole discussion about bear versus man is a question usually posed to women to ask them, hey, would you rather be in the middle of the forest with a strange man that you don't know? And when I mean strange, I mean as in stranger, and or a bear. A lot of women chose bear. Obviously, I chose bear because of the obvious reasons that the intentions of what a bear can do to you. You know that a bear can eat you, you know that a bear can maul you, you know that a bear can tear you apart. You don't know the other intentions of another human being, let alone a strange man that you've never met before, a stranger. And so it would rather be in the best interest of these women to try and go against the bear or try and coexist with the bear versus trying coexisting with a strange man they've never met in their life. It just makes sense. I don't think a lot of men with, two brain cells to rub together would honestly not come to that same conclusion. If you were stuck in the woods with a strange human, a stranger you've never met before, there's a 50-50 chance of them either being the worst human to be in that scenario with or them being an okay human to be in that scenario with. But even then, even when you have good people within isolation, within a forest, by your guys' self, it happens to seem to be like there is often times where good people are changed by their environment, by isolation, by not being in a place where there is society and rules. So really, even the good people that could be stuck in this situation with you could, lose their marbles. So with that whole discussion, that's what I was kind of referring back to when I thought about the name Bear, because in this specific context for this movie, Bear is supposed to be the guy that you can lean on. At least if you're in Nikki's shoes. Nikki actively tells Bear that he feels comfortable to be around, even though, obviously he's a guy, but she sees him as her friend, as a male friend that can be sort of like, like she said, a brother to her, somebody that she can lean on, somebody that feels comfortable, somebody that could even protect her in some instances if we're thinking about the idea of being a brother, but not in any sort of romantic way. And so when you think about the discussion of Bear versus man, and Bear, who was supposed to be this guy who she could rely on, but essentially was the worst sort of man she could have came in contact with when having this wish brought upon her and essentially stripped her autonomy away. When you think about it in that context, it gives the idea that Bear, the character, was supposed to be the safe option of the two options being man versus Bear. If you have Bear being this comfortable guy in which you know and that you have established trust with versus a Bear, you would hope that the Bear in which you know, the character, would be a better choice versus a wild animal. But throughout the movie, we see that that choice isn't the best choice. We see that if given the choice, Bear, the character, would actively act like the worst version of a man in the scenario of man versus Bear. So with that being said, that was kind of the connection that I made between the two, and it was very devastating to think about it in that way because, again, the comfortability of it all is supposed to help in that situation, but it just shows that even when you have somebody like Bear and a guy like Bear, if he has interest or some sort of anything with you, there's a possibility, always a possibility, that he may be evil, straight up. And with that being said, that was sort of my thoughts on his name and if it sort of correlated with the discussion that was being had online. And besides that, my second point, which comes from a Twitter thread that I had saw during the whole craze of Obsession, where people were talking about eyes to the soul. Specifically, this one person was talking about how Nikki, the real Nikki, I'll be distinguishing between the two as Freaky Nikki, which is the puppeteer of Nikki's body, and real Nikki, for obvious reasons. But real Nikki, she often is able to come to the surface and pretty much push Freaky Nikki out of the way to regain, power over her body and control over her body when she looks directly in the eyes of Bear. And when we think about eyes to the soul or just windows to the soul, when we understand eyes and how they're portrayed in media and how they're told, and not told, but rather talked about in things like literature, you often come to this realization that when we talk about eyes, we often talk about they show the true intentions of someone. They show the true character and soul of another person. The eyes never tell, lies, essentially. And when you have somebody like Bear and somebody like Freaky Nikki, who are essentially within this very codependent, toxic relationship that relies on the one wish Willow, when Freaky Nikki does make eye contact with Bear, finally the true, real intention of, rather, not even intention, the real soul of the person that inhabits that body, which is real Nikki, is able to come to the forefront and is able to come to the surface. So whoever that creator was on Twitter that was able to come up with that, because I realized that she would come out at random times, real Nikki would, but I never put two and two together that it was always when they were making eye contact. And throughout the film, we see how Freaky Nikki often keeps herself in the shadows when even trying to look at Bear. We see it on their first encounter when she comes to his house. We see it during the car ride. We see it in so many instances in which I'll put in the video. But we see how she actively tries and not make eye contact in many scenes, and it makes sense as to why the real soul of that body that person, that Freaky Nikki is taking over would come to the surface. So that was one of the other theories that I found interesting, and I think low-key may be true. It hasn't been confirmed, but Just a food for thought. Next, I'm going to title this I Watched You Change, but really it is talking about how Bear makes it such an issue when Nikki changes. And mind you, he is responsible for this change. He knows that he's responsible for this change. He looks it up on Probe if he is the reason why Nikki has changed so drastically. And because of the fact that he watches her change in these ways that are very alarming, she has what could be understood as a panic attack, mental, like, decay, emotional decay, grief. Even if we were to take the One Wish Willow out of the equation, we actively see this girl deteriorate and we see this girl act erratically. But her panic and her anxiety and her fear are often disregarded by Bear in such a barbaric way that he just sees it as an inconvenience for this happy lifestyle that he wants to have with this girl. And if I'm being completely honest, I believe wholeheartedly that Bear never cared for Nikki at all. It comes back to that discussion that they had within the car where those two characters had a disconnect, where the real Nikki was describing that love is different from romance. And we'll get to that point later on. But Bear doesn't understand what real love is. He understands that he likes Nikki, that he has physical attraction to Nikki, and that may be intertwined in some sort of freaked up way of understanding it as love. But through and through, we see throughout the movie that Bear actively doesn't really understand what love is. And he shows his ass each and every time when there are opportunities for him to show actual love to Nikki. When Nikki was actively pleading with him to kill her, that could have been, okay, a mercy killing, sure, but also an act of love. Like, I know that you're stuck in there. I know that this isn't you. And now I have confirmation of that through and through. I will either, one, off myself off or off you off, which he been knew that, but he never freaking did it because he's a anyways. Even if we take out the One Wish Willow, he is a terrible guy through and through. What do you mean you see your girlfriend going through grief in this sort of way and you don't try and actively try and help her in any sort of way? I think at the basis, he just wanted a couple things from Nikki. He wanted the affection, he wanted the attention, and he wanted his lust to be satisfied. He wanted what he understood as love to be encompassed in those three things, and that's what he wanted, was also on top of that submission from Nikki. That's all he wanted. He didn't actually care for Nikki, because if he cared for Nikki, he would have actively been the first person in her life, even after the One Wish Willow, to either off himself and or to try and create some sort of way to offset what's going on with her, because she damages herself in so many ways throughout this movie. But yeah, he just hates that girl. I'm convinced. He hated her, and he disguised it as love. But back to the whole discussion between romance and love, it made me think about how I understand it as well. And honestly, I can understand Nikki very well in that whole conversation, because I thought about it and I was like, love, I understand to be, granted, I don't have that many like partners or XYZ. I've only had one ex. Your homegirl doesn't get, she doesn't date around or date many, as you can see. But even with my lack of experience, I understand that love is more emotion based. It is this deep, unyielding sort of care, affection, and emotion that you have for another person, and you love them past their faults, not through abuse, but through their faults and through their wrongdoings, depending on the wrongdoing, but depending on their wrongs, depending on their faults, but you also find a way to love them. You find the whole person at their truth to be who you love. That is what I think love is. I think love is a very vulnerable emotion to have and to act upon. And I don't think love is this weird, obsession or infatuation with another person or, excusing things that they've done in their life, like, I don't think that's love. I think those are just toxic cop-outs for what people understand what being in love is. And for romance, I understand romance to be more action-based. So taking her out on a date, getting her flowers, chocolates, doing little things like if she had a stress day at work, prepping dinner, or folding her clothes when you know she's backed up on work. Like, doing little stuff and even major stuff can be romantic. Making a mixtape can be romantic. Like, it's not really that hard. And those two things are very different. You can love somebody, be in love with somebody, and do romantic things. That is what I understand those two things to be. And somebody like Bear, who has this very surface level understanding of what love is, just doesn't get it. And so with that being said, that's the end of that whole point. And moving on to the most debated thing, which is so sad that this has been debated so much, but the essay debate. The essay debate is so sad to see that so many people disregard sexual assault, and on top of that, don't understand the basic concern of consent when looking at this film. And I mean that by, I'm going to provide some details from the movie and going to break it down in such a way that even a toddler could understand, because there's no way that this isn't anything but essay. Hold my hand, grab a drink, grab it something to eat. We're about to go into it. And here's a timestamp for anybody who wants to skip talking about essay. I know it's a very uncomfortable conversation to have, and it is a very true conversation to have. But if you're not in the mental space to take that on, go ahead and skip to this, point right here on the screen. But for everybody else, let's get into it. If we're taking away the fact that the One Wish Willow was the reason why Nikki was acting the way that she was, let's understand that this girl was mentally, emotionally, and everything in between unstable. Like, completely unstable, even physically unstable. Because we see the puppeteer of her body, Freaky Nikki, use her body as almost a weapon to damage in front of Bear in order for him to submit to what she wants, which is for her to love her. But if we just take away the One Wish Willow of it all and think about the fact that this man, who would rather have his feelings be confirmed by this girl and then, returned by this girl, the fact of the matter that he would rather continue in this romantic relationship with this girl rather than getting her actual help. If this wasn't like a One Wish Willow thing, if this is what was more of a girl who was taking drugs or was just emotionally going through something because of the whole grief thing with her dad, if this was just a girl who was in a vulnerable spot, he still took advantage of her in those moments because he knew that she wasn't mentally okay. She wasn't mentally okay to consent, if we're being honest. Let's be so for real. If you have somebody in your life acting that erratic and you are in a romantic relationship with them, it is incredibly scary of you to go past all these different areas in their life where you see there are issues and to disregard that. And you're just going to be like, yep, we're going to sleep together. After you told me that you lied about your father having cancer. Like, why aren't we afraid? Why aren't we? This is sadistic. This is harmful. Lying to people that your dad has cancer isn't okay. And the fact that you are willing to push that away because your little itty bitty ego and your affections are returned doesn't make sense. And even during the scene itself, you see this girl isn't experiencing pleasure. She's faking pleasure. And I'm not sure how well people are versed in the idea that you shouldn't be having sexual intercourse if you aren't experiencing pleasure. And if you see your partner not experiencing pleasure, like, I feel like these are basic ideas and concepts, but it seems like a huge debate online. And I don't understand it. And if we put the One Wish Willow into the equation, it makes it even worse because he knows subconsciously and consciously that this girl isn't Nikki. He knows that. So he is just essentially at the basis using her body for pleasure. And he doesn't even look at her once, I'm supposing, because look at this girl's face. It's dead. Even Freaky Nikki can't emulate what pleasure is supposed to be like. She's just a shell. And real Nikki is shoved down there experiencing SA. Don't see how this is not understood to be SA, but those are my thoughts on it. It really doesn't take, rocket science to come to the conclusion that this is SA. I don't care if she consented, even if we're taking away the part of the One Wish Willow. The fact that she is so mentally ill that she is self-harming herself in front of other people to great amounts of degrees, and on top of that, lied about her father having cancer, and on top of that, put your dead cat in the kitchen as a memorial and cook the cat, and you still messing around with that girl. What is wrong with you? Like, you were sick in the head for doing that in the first place. Next point. I refuse to stay on this any longer because it doesn't make any sense if you don't get it. If you don't get it, you probably have an issue. Next. Bear and Ian. This is going to be a short one. I don't understand the relationship. Bear and Ian, now, when watching it the first time, I knew that Ian was jealous of Bear because of the fact that he had access to Nikki. I knew that was as much. He seemed like a jealous freak who just had a terrible ego. Like, Ian was a crappy dude. You can see it through and through. He even somehow feels like he bullies Bear, but somehow Bear finds comfort in him as like a male figure in his life. And they sort of have this toxic bromance that's going on. Toxic yaoi, basically. And they rely on each other in different moments where Ian definitely fails at the most pertinent moment possible. But on top of that, he also just genuinely sucks. And so does Bear. And they have this weird, sucky, toxic relationship that they're in. And I hadn't seen anybody talk about it, but it was just an odd dynamic to have. But that's what happens when you have crappy friends, isn't it? Next. For one, just side note, everybody failed Nikki. You have Sarah. She never even checked up on Nikki. In fact, she thought that Bear was the one being taken advantage of. Girl, you just wanted him. Wrap it up. 2, Ian. She was Ian's F buddy, but even then, Ian never took any sort of action to check in on Nikki to make sure that she was okay. Even when she bashed her face in with a bottle, nobody really ever gave a crap in order to check up on this girl and with this guy who obviously isn't doing anything. Number 3, Bear himself. We all know the reason why Bear doesn't. Bear is just out of this question when it comes to he failed her. He did more than fail her. He failed her, and he was also her perpetrator in the instance. Next. The cat and Bear's smell. So I thought this was very interesting because I understood that the puppeteer, Freaky Nikki, really enjoyed pieces and parts of Bear that she was collecting, essentially. For example, through the senses. So you have like his smell, you have like wanting to kiss him and stuff like that. But you also have like she took a piece of his hair. We don't know what she did with that piece of hair. And there was always this bringing up of the cat. You have the cat clock, which I didn't see until the third movie, honestly. Third movie, but the third watching, I didn't even catch it. The cat clock on the wall, you have Bear's cat, Sandy, who is continuously used against Bear, both in the memorial and in his sandwich. You have the joke, what's in the inside joke that she played on him, and just this continuous need to involve cats makes me wonder if Freaky Nikki, which is this puppeteer, demonic, whatever you want to call it, entity, doesn't really understand animals in a way. Like, I don't know what's wrong with Freaky Nikki and animals, but maybe it was because Bear loved the cat, that she somehow had beef with the cat and was like, okay, well, since you love this cat so much, I'm gonna put him in your sandwich. Like, maybe it was that. I don't know, but it was just something that I noted. Next, We're talking about the freak herself, Freaky Nikki. Now, Freaky Nikki has many attributes. We know that she understands a couple amounts of things, but she also fails to get very settled in with Nikki's body, if that makes sense. Freaky Nikki doesn't know how to work the human body. And I say this with full confidence because of these points that I have here. Let's start off with body movements. As we see throughout the film, Freaky Nikki is capable of moving like a normal human being like you and I, but Freaky Nikki sometimes goes out of her way or doesn't know how to maneuver a human body, and you see that through her robotic, stiff way of standing, especially when she feels emotion, when she's like creeping around. Like, you see her body move in very odd ways that she is trying to maneuver with Nikki's body, and it often comes when she experiences one of the three emotions in which she understands. And we'll get to the emotions part later. But you see that she doesn't really know how to move the mechanics. Like, she doesn't really know what to do with Nikki's body. And that takes me to my next point, which is bodily functions. We see throughout the movie that Freaky Nikki uses regular Nikki's body to almost as a weapon, like I mentioned previously, to keep Bear in his place. But also on top of that, she doesn't really know how bodily functions work, or rather doesn't care. Freaky Nikki doesn't take care of regular Nikki's body at all. She only showers when it's disgusting to Bear. She will throw up on herself, pee on herself, probably crap on herself if need be, if he's not around. The body literally just means nothing. It's practically a shell to Freaky Nikki when Bear isn't present. And so when it comes to bodily functions, like, I'm pretty sure Nikki hasn't eaten in that whole montage where things were escalating. Like, she probably hasn't eaten food or drank water in a very, very long time. So I don't think the Freaky Nikki puppeteer really cares to even take care of bodily function, even though that body is one of the reasons why Bear is so attracted to her. Next, language and writing. The language part of Freaky Nikki is so interesting because the fanfic writing of Hansel and Gretel that she made makes sense in terms of giving a hint to Bear, like, hey, this is your fault because you wished upon a willow, stupid. But on top of that, how she knows and has access to the feelings that real Nikki has for Bear previously to the One Wish Willow, which was this understanding that they're sort of like siblings, and how that becomes incestuous by being in this romantic relationship. And you see that the writing of Hansel and Gretel is fairly decent. Freaky, incestuous, nasty, yes, but it's also well written, I will say. It was fairly good. It was solid. It was solid. And so you see that the puppeteer is able to take that ability from the real Nikki. But when it comes to language, it struggles, which is interesting because language is supposed to automatically be intertwined with writing, obviously. But when the puppeteer Nikki, Freaky Nikki, gets into Nikki's body for the first time, when, you know, the car scene was happening, you see her mix up her words in a way that is very hard to do when you're a native speaker, especially when you have something very sensitive to talk about. Like, she was saying how, oh, my cat just died. You should come in. Wait, no, your cat just died. You should come in. Like, it was having trouble with that little bit of sentence, and it's really something hard that you have to really think about in order to mess up. And so that was one thing that I talked about, because I was like, the language that Freaky Nikki uses is probably outdated. That's why I think Hansel and Gretel honestly kind of ate in terms of the writing portion. But when it came to more modern language, it took a while in order for it to get accustomed to it. And on top of that, not only do I think that entity is old, but I think it has the innocence of a child. Hence why you have these tantrums, you have her yelling, which again is going to be part of my last point, which is human emotion. Human emotion for Freaky Nikki doesn't really exist. Not the ones that truly matter. Like, it understands anger, it understands frustration, and it understands sadness. It understands those three, like, types of emotions. But actual happiness, excitement, granted, you do see Freaky Nikki get excited or happy in some instances throughout the movie, but it just seems like her stronger emotions of that anger, that frustration, and that sadness takes over more than being grossed out, being happy, being like all these other different emotions that you can experience when being a person. And it kind of struggles in that area where human emotion needs to be, fluctuating and needs to be diverse. It kind of just has this blank slate of understanding what emotion is, and especially human emotion. I think because of the childlike innocence of that entity, it makes it worse by far. And lastly, my last thing, so we can get off this before it gets to the 40-minute mark, thank God, because I do not want to edit. But anyways, the One Wish Willow Corporation and/or company. So the fact that this One Wish Willow has been going on for quite some time, here are the facts in which we know that were provided by the movie. We know that they have a bunch of toys, that it's been going on for, I would suspect, 20 plus years or so, because they are understood to be antiques. They are seen to be working sometimes and not working other times. If those reviews are even made by people that are, truly using the One Wish Willows, or if they're associates of the One Wish Willow Corporation and Company, and they're just putting, no, these things don't work, in order to have people, buy them more for antique purposes or use them more, sort of like reverse psychology, the people that want to use the One Wish Willow. The fact that they have a call center, like a helpline, even though the helpline does not help, and they have access to the people that have been suppressed by somebody else's wish, like Nikki was. Like, how do you even store her and have this other entity be put in her place? There are so many questions that I have in terms of the One Wish Corporation. Was there like a magical willow tree that they found and they were like, hey, let's make this into a toy, and then it suddenly makes wishes come true? Like, what is the One Wish Willow at its essence? Where does it come from, originate from? The fact that there were a business is crazy in its own, like, rationale. Like, there's so many things I have questions about, but I don't, oddly enough, want them to be answered, because I think that's what makes it a great movie. If I walk away with questions, yeah, it was good. That was all that I have for Obsession. And if you guys like the film, didn't like the film, leave your comments down below so I can also understand what you guys thought about it. If you guys saw anything that I missed that I didn't talk about in this video. And yeah, if you enjoyed this pod, give it a like, give it a comment, subscribe if you want, or not. You have free will. And with this being said, I think this wraps it up. I'm logging off.